Welcome to the 2021 virtual bus tour of the Pulaski Area Historical Society during this Kazimierz Pulaski Week. My name is Stephen Karch and I am the curator of our wonderful museum in downtown Pulaski. I will be your presenter on our virtual journey into Pulaski's rich and colorful past. This tour is by no means a complete history. Instead, I've chosen to cover several famous and infamous events in the area's past in hopes that I can both entertain and educate you. Welcome to the 2021 Historical Bus Tour. We are on the site of the former Chicago and Northwestern Train Depot in Pulaski, Wisconsin. Our story starts not in the beginning, 1884, but further in the roll of years to 1905, and not in Pulaski, but in a place called Galesburg, a lively little settlement 14 miles north of Black Creek. It's an odd place to start the story, especially since most folks today won't find Galesburg on a map, or even remember what little country crossroads this side of Shawano County led to the hamlet. But it was a real place like Angelica, Laney, or Faracious Corners. But one force led Galesburg to be forgotten. It was the same force that led businessmen and newspaper editors in Seymour and Shawano to lose sleep at night. It moved state politicians and tycoons alike to fix their gaze on this little corner of Wisconsin. And that force was the railroad. It's the reason Pulaski boomed in those early years prior to incorporation in 1910. In the later part of the 19th century, settlements like Angelica were betting on the railroad passing through. An early map of Angelica shows the proposed train route going past the Methodist Church and west of Bondwell. In places like Angelica and Laney, hungry land speculators were buying $50 lots with the intent to sell them for over $2,000. County officials were wheeling and dealing with the owners of the railroads while trying to encourage the various townships to invest in development because by God the Iron Road was coming. In 1906, the editor of the Seymour Press wrote to the Appleton Post-Crescent a dire warning that Seymour would suffer much needed business once the railroad passed through Pulaski. But in 1905, work began on building the Northwestern Rail from Green Bay west to Eland, Wisconsin, passing through Pulaski. The project was a huge endeavor, requiring over 1 million feet of lumber just to build the bridges. But the project also opened up new regions of woodlands to harvest. The project was complete in late 1906, early 1907. A rail landing was built for passengers and freight to offload and board, along with a depot. In those early years, Victor Adlus was the railway agent for the village. Pulaski had a modest but busy railway operation, complete with granaries, stockyards, a coal yard, even a warehouse for Rar's beer, advertised as the only drink for patriotic Poles. The biggest operator in the area for many years was the Chicago and Northwestern Railway, with routes leading west out of Pulaski towards Wausau and north into the Great Woods, and northeast into the Upper Peninsula's copper country. In 1907, the American Express Company opened offices along the Eland-Green Bay route at Gillett, Croco, Pulaski, and Anston. In 1911, 2 new passenger trains stopped in Pulaski on their way between Chicago and Ashland. The trains brought much needed goods to the area, including heavy farm equipment, automobile, the mail, and most importantly, settlers by the hundreds. J.J. Hoff, the land agent, responsible for the vast majority of the area's settlement, made very alluring deals with the railroads to encourage Polish immigrants from big cities like Chicago and Detroit to visit his colonies in Pulaski, Croco, and Sobieski. These deals were often at reduced prices, and I'm certain Mr. Hoff even paid for a fare or two from his own pocket. From Pulaski, the trains carried young men north to work in the lumber camps of Upper Michigan, and tons of farm goods like cabbage and peas, along with livestock, to larger wholesale markets in bigger cities like Milwaukee and St. Paul. In 1935, a person could make a trip from Chicago to Iron River, Michigan in 12 hours by way of the train. With all this activity, the editor of the Seymour Press was dead on in his prediction of 1906. But the trains weren't without controversy and incident. In May 1905, Stephen Stashik, a farmer from Pulaski, was awarded $180 for the right-of-way damages inflicted upon his farmstead when the railroad passed through it. On September 21, 1906, before the Eland line was completed, 2 workers were killed and 14 others injured when the sleeper car they were resting in was struck by a Northwestern work train outside of Pulaski. In 1918, after numerous slips, trips, and falls near the depot, the town board ordered that an automatic bell and additional lights be put in place. On February 8, 1933, during an especially bitter morning with below zero temps, the Milwaukee Road No. 3, also known as the Copper Country Limited, encountered a freeze-fractured and cracked rail 3 miles south of Pulaski. They were warned of a bad section of track in the area, but the location was off by a mile. The conductor, Fred Arnett, had reduced the speed of the train to 25 miles an hour, but once the train hit the cracked rail, the locomotive's pilot wheels derailed, and like a kite in the wind, the entire train violently rolled side to side. The sleeper car, on the very tail, snapped free of its coupling, tumbling over once and sliding down an 8-foot embankment. Otto Beck, the train's flagman, was killed instantly, being caught between the passenger coach and the sleeper car, as the two were violently jammed together. Beck's body was found moments after the wreck by Oliver Jordan, a 49-year-old black man from Chicago, who was a porter working on the train. After realizing that Beck could not be helped, Jordan turned his attention towards helping the injured make it the 100 yards from the wreck of the sleeper to the still upright and, more importantly, heated passenger car. 6 passengers were injured that day, and all spoke highly of the care and kindness shown to them by Oliver Jordan. The other hero that morning was Fred Carrick, one of the train's brakemen. Carrick, a native of De Pere, walked 3 miles in below zero temps from the derailed train to Pulaski to alert local authorities. Carrick passed away in June of 1967, having worked for the Milwaukee Road Railway for 35 years. Despite the best efforts of rail authorities and locals, derailments still happen. Anston in 1947, Pulaski in 1960, Pittsfield in 1965, Pulaski in 1965, and Anston again in 1979. These later derailments were freight trains with no serious injuries. The 1960 Pulaski derailment scattered pulpwood flooring and paper products all over the right-of-way outside of the village. The 1979 derailment in Anston actually left a boxcar in Miss Eunice Lutke's garden. Her and her husband, Glenn, lived on the corner of Anston Road and County Road C. Accidental deaths and petty crime dodged the railway throughout the years. In March of 1919, and again in 1951, saboteurs tried to derail the trains outside Pulaski. On January 7, 1925, 3 bandits staged a holdup of the depot in Pulaski, making off with $62 in cash. In 1932, burglars struggled with the 1,000-pound safe from the depot, only to abandon it a half-mile down the road after it fell off the makeshift bed they built on their getaway car. One year, a group of hobos broke into the canning factory and stole several cases of sauerkraut. They were later caught at their camp and held for a short time, after which they were ordered to leave the county. Hobos were a real nuisance, and mothers warned their daughters not to go out to the barns and outbuildings at night, especially if they lived anywhere near the railroad tracks. After World War II, the railroad in Pulaski took a slow and steady decline. With more folks driving, the railroads weren't making money in passenger services. Pulaski continued offering passenger services well into the late 1960s. With more railways going to freight only, it was only a matter of time before Pulaski's depot went out of service. In 1981, the 6.2 miles of rail from Pulaski to Gillett was slated for abandonment, and in 1987, the depot in Pulaski was torn down. The last remainder of the iron road in Pulaski disappeared in the summer of 1990 as 2,600 railroad ties were pulled up from the graded bed to make way for the Mountain Bay Trail.